So, as far as the KTM photograph goes,
Yeah.
if we could somehow play off the orange on that hill. And that was so gorgeous. Mark, will you help me? Come on, man.
Well, they can't say we didn't have any fun. Welcome back, guys. This is episode 42 of the Ben Motorcycle Adventures podcast, and today we're going to be talking about Idaho BDR tips. So that's right, guys. I just got back from riding the Idaho BDR again. It hasn't even been 5 days, and you know, once you've been on a route 2, 3, 4 times, it's interesting. You have a tendency to look at things a little bit differently. So what did I learn here in 2019 from riding the Idaho BDR? That is what I want to share with you today. Last thing before we roll into this episode, crushing miles. I am no longer going to produce content for that podcast, that website, or those social media accounts. Now, hear me out. I'm just too busy to manage 2 websites and 2 social media accounts. This business, Ben Motorcycle Adventures, and some other online interests that I have just take up too much of my time. So all the content that I create moving forward will be found on benmotorcycleadventures.com and at Ben Motorcycle Adventures on my social media accounts. And obviously we'll be dishing out brand new episodes of this podcast right here where you're listening each and every week. All right, guys and girls, we are fresh off the Idaho backcountry discovery route. I just spent 7 days out there. And again, I thought this would be a great opportunity to share with you a bunch of tips from, things that I've learned from my experiences riding this route. And tip number 1 from me would be, hey, don't be afraid to deviate or diverge from the route. And let me explain that just a little bit further. So we actually started our ride in Sun Valley, Idaho, and then ultimately made our way over to Anderson Ranch Reservoir. But to kind of start here, I would tell you that you can kick off your ride anywhere. You don't have to go down to Jarbidge, Nevada, and that is the official start of the route, but you don't have to necessarily go down there to get this thing underway. A couple of my favorite places to start the ride: Boise, Idaho. There's a nice ride out of Boise all the way over to Pine, albeit short. If you go direct, you can make it much longer, but Boise is a good starting point for the route. Jarbidge is a fun start for the route, though logistically it's a difficult place to get to and start. And if you're trailering in or something like that, it's probably not a place where you can really leave any of your personal stuff behind. I also like Elko, Nevada, as kind of a launch point for the ride. Coincidentally, Elko is a part of the Nevada BDR, so if you ride out of Elko, you can actually ride the last section of the Nevada backcountry discovery route up to Jarbidge, and then you can stay at the outdoor inn and you can set sail and ride that first leg of the Idaho BDR. But Elko's great. There's an airport there, obviously good accommodations, casinos, you name it. Everything you need is in Elko. So I would highly recommend you just add a day to your ride or subtract a day from your ride on the other end and kick that thing off in Elko. And then considering the route as a whole, don't be afraid to deviate from that either. There are a lot of points of interest, lookouts, lakes, small towns that are not on the Idaho BDR route, not even maybe on the Idaho BDR map. So that's definitely something you want to consider and make sure that you develop an adventure that works for you. I remember Kevin Woody saying in episode 34 of this podcast that these routes, these backcountry discovery routes, are one way to make your way through all these states. It's not the only way, for sure, and in some cases it's not even the best way. And just to give you an example of that, this year we rode south from Darby, Montana, and worked our way back down to Sun Valley. So I had to nav that down through Montana, and admittedly, that was probably the best riding of the whole trip, and the Idaho BDR is good. But again, it's not the only way to get through the state. And sometimes I think you need to get off the route a little bit to find better accommodations, better places to stay. Don't be afraid to ride 20 miles out of your way. I think you'd be surprised with what you might find. And these routes intentionally visit small towns or historical places, so there's usually not a ton of options. So again, tip number 1, don't be afraid to deviate from the route and ultimately develop that adventure that works best for you. Tip number 2, let's talk a little bit about our gear. And I'm probably going to be repeating myself, but here's the bottom line. Make sure you bring gear that will help you under any weather circumstances, rain, snow, heavy winds, whatever the case may be. Let me paint a picture of our ride for you here. So day 1, I think we rode about 140 miles, and I would say that it was a deluge, right? It poured all day long. There was nowhere to hide. I saw temps as low as 38. For a minute, I thought it was going to snow. And I don't care how good your gear is. At some point in the day, when you're just getting pummeled by rain, you're going to get wet. So our stuff got wet. Thankfully, we utilized lodging on our rides, so we were able to get everything dried out for day 2. But day 1, a complete washout. Day 2, midday, serious thunderstorm near Loman and above Loman. Got soaked again. Day 3, rolling into Bergdorf. Was it Bergdorf Hot Springs? Oh man, my memory's a little bit fuzzy. Same thing. We're riding into Bergdorf. We're getting hammered by rain and hail. And then as we departed Bergdorf the next morning, it was pouring again. Super low temp. So what am I trying to say to you? Make sure you've got a great jacket, great pants, warm gloves, layers. I utilize compression thermals. They're like stretchy Under Armour type things, but they keep my body warm. You want a layer that's going to break the wind. There's nothing worse than getting wet and then having to deal with the wind chill just created by the speeds on the bike. So make sure you are adequately outfitted for this kind of riding. And hey, this isn't Colorado. You're not going to be riding passes that are 10 to 13,000 feet, but you're going to get up around 9K a couple times. And depending on the time of year you go, you could see some snow flurries, but you could most definitely see some rain, some wind, and some cooler temps. In fact, I don't think we saw temps above 68 degrees until we actually got to Montana. So we're 5 days into our ride, and I think the average temp was probably 55 degrees. So that's something that you want to consider. I know you've got room on your bike. If you don't, giantloop.com, they can help you out with your packing solution. In fact, that's exactly what they did the day before I went to Idaho. Giant Loop wasn't even open, but I saw the front door open, so I dropped in there. I talked to Harold and I said, hey man, I need just a little bit more storage, more space. And he actually attached a couple of the possible pouches to my saddlebags, and that made a big difference for me. So don't skimp on your luggage. Don't skip on your gear. That's tip number 2. Make sure you go out there adequately prepared. Tip number 3, let's talk a little bit about tires. Now, I think everybody knows by now that I use Golden tires, and I choose Golden tires, GT723s, GT723Rs. When I took my 790 to Idaho, I had the R on the front and the standard GT723 on the rear. I'm happy to say they performed amazing. My counterpart on a 790, he did the same thing. First time using the Golden tires, and he was raving about them. Those things are awesome. So not only an amazing dual sport tire, but also an amazing adventure tire. All that being said, I don't care what brand of tires you run, but I would advise you to run something far better than a 50/50. I would encourage you to run a knobby, something with spacing, something with height, something that can dig in. And I just want to cite a couple of the first days of riding. Again, day 1, a serious deluge. There's no rock in the road. They're not particularly firm. And there was a little bit of a climb near Anderson Ranch Reservoir before you drop into Pine. And it was super soft and super muddy. And there's just no way you would have made it up that hill or got into Pine with a 50/50 tire. You would have had to have found a different way. You needed spacing. You needed knob depth. And, that was kind of the theme for the first 3 or 4 days in Idaho. There's not a lot of rock in their roads. So when it gets pummeled with rain, it gets really soft and these big adventure bikes sink down, and you don't want to find yourself in a situation where you're riding some of that stuff like that New Mexico Play-Doh that quickly cakes up your 50/50 tire or packs your fender full of mud so that you can't continue on. We rode through a kind of a landslide too as we were dropping down to the middle fork of the Boise River, and that was pretty sandy, pretty deep, pretty muddy. So just something I want to bring you guys up to speed on. Make sure that when you ride that Idaho BDR, you've got a reasonably aggressive tire, unless it's dry the whole time, which actually, we could argue about conditions. I was happy that we got rain because the conditions were fantastic. I rode through there last year when it was pretty much bone dry. I'd opt for a little bit of rain to make the conditions great, but under those circumstances, you're just going to need a better tire. Again, I would recommend the Golden tires for your adventure bike or dual sport, but it doesn't really matter. But I think I would get something out there that's DOT legal and on the more aggressive side, maybe at 80/20 at least. Okay, tip number 4, make sure you download and use the GPX tracks from the Ride BDR website. They're easy, they're free, and it's going to be tough to navigate any of these routes with the paper map. For one thing, you would be stopping very often. There's a lot of twists and turns on all these routes. And number 2, those road signs aren't what they used to be, or they're not there, or things have changed. So follow the tracks. Ride BDR also has updated tracks for issues like the road closure above Loman, the creek crossing, actually, I should say the road closure below Loman and the creek crossing above Loman. Two great instances of reroutes, and this year we didn't do the creek crossing. Why? We were advised not to. I did it last year, but honestly, if you continue on up that main line on, I believe it's Bear Creek Road, Long Creek Road, something like that, if you don't take a right at the intersection that ultimately will lead you to the water crossing about an hour later, you just continue on up a main line, which was a great ride along the creek, and I would say that you save 45 minutes to an hour. And I'm getting off topic here, but what I wanted to communicate was make sure you have the tracks. They're great. Well, I shouldn't say they're great. They're essential. And then, use the map as a supplement. Do some reading up. You can pull it out here and there to maybe look for some points of interest. But really, the tracks are what's going to help you navigate the best. And then, again, like I always say, I use the app. GPS Tracks cost me $20 a year, but it's really super easy to open a track and follow it, record a track, whatever you want to do. GPS Tracks, that's a plug for them, and it's not sponsored or anything like that. I'm paying for it out of my pocket, but it truly is a great app. So again, tip number 4, don't forget about the tracks. It'd be great if you'd buy the map. It would help support routes in the future, which I think all of us would appreciate. But at the end of the day, use those tracks to help you along the way. Okay, last tip number 5. I would encourage everybody who rides this route to utilize lodging. And hear me out here. When you spend money in these small communities, when you ride through there next year, that store is still open. That motel, that hotel, those things are still open. They're still in business, and that's really important on a route like this. I tell you what, you pull one gas station out or one piece of lodging along the way, and then this entire ride looks a lot different. Now, I know there's a lot of people who love to go out there and camp, and hey, I don't care what you do either way, but I think the message I'm trying to communicate is when you visit these small towns, make sure you spend a little bit of your hard-earned cash there. I probably spent $10 or $15 at the store in Loman and donated some money to a little charity bucket that they had there at the cash register. But I'd hate to see some of these cool iconic places disappear year over year. I mean, Pine's a great example of that. Great story there. I was at Trinity Hot Springs. We had unpacked our bags. Everybody's heading down to the pool, and I go, oh crap! I don't have my shoes. I left my shoes in my truck at Sun Valley, so I called down to the store. They were already, it was already after hours. This really amazing woman answered the phone, and I was like, hey, do you have sandals or shoes or something down there that I can use? And it was kind of weird. We were going to go out to dinner and do all this stuff, and I don't have any shoes or anything. I don't really want to walk around in riding boots. And she said, yeah, I've got some flip-flops or whatever down here. So what do? I'm already in my shorts. I throw my riding boots and my helmet on, sprint down the 4 or 5 miles to the store on the 790 and buy a $5 set of sandals, and then, probably a Red Bull and some jerky and stuff like that. But yeah, we want to keep these places open. Pine, like I said, Pine's a great example of that. The gas station, restaurant, store in Elk City. I'd hate to see some of those places not get your business while you're out there riding. So, to take it one step back. If you don't utilize lodging, no big deal. But when you step into these small towns, make sure you spend a few bucks. All right, guys, that's about all I've got for my Idaho BDR tips, having ridden it over the past few years. If you have any other questions about the route, bendmotorcycleadventures@gmail.com. And, just last thing, the Idaho BDR is magical. It's remote. It'll give you an opportunity to kind of disconnect from the real world if you need to disconnect from the real world for a bit of time. But it's definitely a route that will make you reflect and remind you of what's important. So, again, I would strongly advise, if you're looking at a route to ride in 2020, I would point you toward the Idaho BDR. It's one of the best out there. Now, if you are looking for all-inclusive guided rides, think backcountry discovery routes, think Continental Divide, bendmotorcycleadventures.com, adventure motorcycle training, dual sport and ADV guided rides, backcountry discovery routes, the Continental Divide. We are working. I think we've pretty much established our schedule, so I'm going to jump in there. I think we've established our touring schedule for 2020. We've reached out to landowners, Forest Service, working on the permitting process so that we can guide some of these rides. And just to give you an idea, we're looking at hosting a ride on the SoCal BDR in January. Actually, January, February, March, and April. We want to host a bunch of guided adventure rides down there in SoCal. Those months, I believe, New Mexico in May, Oregon and Utah in June, Washington in July, Colorado in August, also the Continental Divide in August, and then Idaho in September, Arizona and Nevada in October. So that's kind of what the schedule looks. All-inclusive guided rides. Bring your own bike or rent one of our KTM dual sports. But again, I think we are one of the best adventure motorcycle, dual sport motorcycle touring businesses in the game, and we are ramping up for 2020. So if you want to get out there for a guided ride, or if you're a little bit concerned about your ADV bike skills, hit us up, bendmotorcycleadventures.com and bendmotorcycleadventures@gmail.com. Last plug, don't forget about our social media channels at Bend Motorcycle Adventures on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. Again, that's at Bend Motorcycle Adventures. Friends, I'm going to get out of here. I'll see you next week. We will be doing an episode talking about my thoughts on the KTM 790 Adventure R off-road. So I've got about 3,000 miles on the bike now, a couple thousand of those, over 2,000 in the off-road arena. I'm excited to talk about it. We've had a lot of people ask questions about this. A lot of listeners have written in, so we'll read off your questions, do a little Q&A, and I'll just share my thoughts on the 790 as an off-road adventure touring bike. Looking forward to it. We'll see you guys next week.